The three human ships moved slowly away from Nexus Prime, with their engines running at minimum power to avoid looking threatening to the massive alien fleets that surrounded them. Captain Jake Morrison watched his tactical display and counted 247 enemy vessels arranged in a perfect sphere around the human formation. The UES Harmony carried the diplomatic team, while the escort ships UES Sentinel and UES Defiance tried to provide what protection they could against impossible odds. War Speaker Klaxon broadcast a message to all three human ships, and his voice, filled with the satisfaction of a predator that had finally cornered its prey. He spoke about how humanity had interfered in galactic politics for too long, and how their weakness was spreading to other species like a disease that needed to be cured. The Zephyrian commander made it clear that the humans would not be allowed to return to Earth with knowledge of alien military capabilities and fleet positions. Captain Helen Brooks stood on the bridge of the Sentinel and watched her tactical Officer Lieutenant Ben Collins work frantically at his station, trying to find some weakness in the alien formation. The crystalline ships looked like massive geometric crystals that glowed with internal energy, while the Zephyrian vessels resembled metal predators with weapons pointing in every direction. Both fleets had arranged themselves so that any attempt to break out would be met with concentrated fire from multiple directions. Resonance Prime, Vex High added the voice of the crystalline collective to the alien ultimatum, and the harmonic translator filled the human bridges with sounds like singing crystal bells. The message was that humanity's discordant influence needed to be silenced forever, so that the pure conflict between the two great empires could proceed without interference from lesser species who did not understand the deeper philosophical issues at stake. Ambassador Lisa Parker tried one last desperate attempt at negotiation by opening communication channels to both alien fleets and appealing to galactic law and the ancient traditions of safe passage for diplomatic missions. She spoke about the billions of innocent lives that would be lost if the war spread beyond the disputed territories, and reminded both sides that they had signed treaties protecting neutral mediators. The alien response was laughter from the Zephyrians and harmonic discord from the crystallines. War Speaker Klaxon told Parker that galactic law was written by the strong to control the weak, and that humanity had never been strong enough to deserve protection under those laws. Resonance Prime Vex High added that the crystalline collective recognized no authority higher than their own pure purpose, and that human concepts of justice were meaningless noise. Captain Tony Richards commanded the destroyer UES Defiance, and his ship was the smallest of the three human vessels, but it carried the most advanced weapons systems that Earth had developed. Richards was a veteran of the border wars against space pirates, and he knew that running from this fight would only delay their deaths by a few minutes. His weapons officer, Lieutenant Paul Martinez, was already running targeting solutions on the EO closest alien ships. Dr. Pete Hansen stood beside Ambassador Parker on the bridge of the Harmony and watched the alien fleet movements with the trained eye of someone who had studied dozens of different species. He could see that both the Zephyrians and crystallines were positioning their ships for a capture mission rather than immediate destruction. They wanted to take human technology and personnel alive for study and interrogation. The first shots came from a Zephyrian heavy cruiser that fired across the bow of the Defiance as a warning to stop, trying to maneuver out of the trap. The energy beam missed the human ship by only a few hundred meters and left a glowing trail of ionized particles in the vacuum of space. Captain Richards ordered his shields to full power, but everyone knew that three ships could not fight their way through two entire battle fleets. Commander Roy Adams reviewed the tactical situation from his position on the Harmony and realized that the aliens had made one critical mistake in their planning. They had studied human diplomatic methods and peaceful exploration ships, but they had never seen what humans were actually capable of when they were pushed beyond their limits. The galaxy knew humans as mediators and peacemakers, but they had forgotten that every human world had been won through centuries of the most brutal warfare in known history. Captain Morrison made a decision that would change the course of galactic politics forever. He opened a secure channel to both the Sentinel and Defiance and spoke the words that ended humanity's role as peaceful mediators. Morrison told his fellow captains that diplomatic protocols were suspended and that all human vessels were authorized to engage with extreme prejudice against any hostile forces. The transformation was immediate, and terrifying for anyone who knew how to read the signs. The three human ships had been flying in a loose formation designed for peaceful travel, but they suddenly shifted into a tight combat wedge that maximized their combined firepower while minimizing the angles from which they could be attacked. Their engines went to full military power and their sensor arrays switched from passive scanning to active targeting locks. Lieutenant Collins aboard the Sentinel watched his displays light up as weapon systems that had been powered down for the diplomatic mission came online for the first time since leaving Earth. The human ships had been carrying military equipment that was far more advanced than anything they had revealed during joint training exercises with alien forces. Humanity had been deliberately hiding their true capabilities for decades while pretending to be a peaceful species interested only in trade and mediation. The aliens noticed the change in human behavior, but they did not understand what it meant until it was too late. War Speaker Klaxon ordered his fleet to move closer and prepare to disable the human ships with minimal damage so that their crews and technology could be captured intact. The crystalline formation began to shift into a pattern designed to surround the humans completely and prevent any chance of escape. Captain Brooks gave the order that humanity had been waiting 2 centuries to give. She told her weapons officer to target the largest Zephyrian battleship and fire all forward batteries at maximum power. The Sentinel's main guns had been designed to crack the armor of capital ships, and they had never been fired at full charge during any demonstration for alien observers. The energy beams that erupted from the human ship were brighter than a small star, and they covered the distance to their target in less than a second. The Zephyrian battleship simply vanished in a ball of expanding plasma as its shields overloaded and its hull vaporized under the incredible energy release. 2 escort cruisers that had been flying close formation were caught in the explosion, and they tumbled away with their hulls cracked open and atmosphere streaming from dozens of breaches. The alien fleet suddenly realized that they were not facing the weak diplomatic vessels they had expected, but warships that had been disguised as peaceful explorers. The humans had been playing a game of deception that was about to teach both the Zephyrian Empire and Crystalline Collective a lesson they would never forget about the difference between choosing peace and being incapable of war. The destruction of the Zephyrian battleship sent shockwaves through both alien fleets as their commanders tried to understand what had just happened. War Speaker Klaxon stared at his tactical displays and watched the debris cloud where one of his most powerful ships had been only seconds before. The energy readings from the human weapon discharge were beyond anything in Zephyrian military databases, and his officers were frantically recalculating their threat assessments. Captain Helen Brooks did not give the aliens time to recover from their surprise. She ordered her tactical officer, Lieutenant Collins, to target the nearest crystalline formation and demonstrate that human weapons worked equally well against both enemy types. The Sentinel's secondary batteries opened fire with streams of guided projectiles that moved through space like deadly silver serpents seeking their prey. The crystalline ships tried to maneuver away from the incoming fire, but their beautiful crystal formations were too rigid to change direction quickly. 3 of their grown vessels shattered like glass sculptures hit by hammers as the human projectiles found their targets and exploded with precisely calculated force. The fragments of crystal that had once been living ships sparkled in the starlight as they tumbled away into the darkness of space. Resonance. Prime Vexhi broadcast harmonic frequencies of pure shock and disbelief as the Crystalline Collective realized that their enemies were not the weak humans they had studied, but warriors who had been hiding their strength behind a mask of peaceful diplomacy. The crystal being's color shifted through the entire spectrum, as emotions too complex for translation coursed through the collective consciousness of the alien species. Captain Tony Richards brought the destroyer Defiance into the fight with the fury of a much larger ship compressed into a smaller hull. His weapons officer, Lieutenant Martinez, had been waiting for this moment since they left Earth, and he coordinated the ship's firepower with the deadly precision of a surgeon using a scalpel. The Defiance might have been the smallest human vessel, but it carried experimental weapons that turned size advantage into a liability for larger targets. The human ships moved through space with a fluidity that the aliens had never seen before in any military formation. Instead of the predictable patterns that most species used in battle, the 3 vessels seemed to dance around each other in a complex weaving motion that made them almost impossible to target effectively. Lieutenant Collins explained to his captain that this was ancient human naval tactics adapted for three-dimensional space combat. Ambassador Lisa Parker stood on the bridge of the Harmony and watched humanity reveal its true nature for the first time in galactic history. She had spent her career building the image of humans as peaceful mediators who preferred negotiation to violence, but now she was seeing the species that had conquered an entire world through 10,000 years of constant warfare. Her diplomatic training had not prepared her for watching her own people become the most dangerous predators in known space. Dr. Pete Hansen provided crucial intelligence as the battle developed by using his knowledge of alien psychology to predict how both enemy fleets would respond to the human attacks. He explained that the Zephyrians were trained to fight against opponents who followed their own rigid codes of honor, while the Crystallines expected their enemies to maintain harmonic battle formations that could be countered with mathematical precision. The human approach to warfare was completely different from anything either alien species had ever encountered. Captain Morrison ordered his ships to attack in seemingly random patterns that made no sense according to traditional military doctrine but which maximized damage while minimizing their exposure to return fire. The aliens found themselves fighting an enemy that refused to follow any rules they understood. Commander Roy Adams revealed another aspect of human military capability when he activated the Harmony's hidden weapon systems. The ship that both alien fleets had dismissed as a harmless diplomatic transport suddenly bristled with gun ports and missile launchers that had been concealed behind false hull plating. The Harmony had been designed to look peaceful while carrying enough firepower to level a small moon. The battle entered a new phase as more human capabilities came online, and the aliens realized that everything they thought they knew about human military technology was wrong. Chief Engineer Maria Santos aboard the Sentinel began implementing combat modifications that pushed their ships beyond their normal design limits, while human engineers used their talent for improvisation to adapt their systems in real time. War Speaker Klaxon tried to rally his fleet by broadcasting challenges about Zephyrian honor and the glory of dying in battle. But his warriors were facing an enemy that did not care about honor or glory. The human ships struck like ghosts that appeared from nowhere and vanished before return fire could find them. Zephyrian battle doctrine was based on frontal assaults by massive formations, but the humans refused to stand still long enough to be hit by such tactics. The Crystalline Collective attempted to coordinate their response through harmonic communication, but the human ships were jamming their frequencies with electronic warfare systems that turned their beautiful crystal songs into meaningless noise. Resonance Prime Vexi found that the mathematical precision of crystal battle formations became a weakness when facing an enemy that moved according to chaos theory rather than geometric patterns. Captain Brooks coordinated with the other human ships to demonstrate the ultimate evolution of their species' military thinking. Humanity had spent centuries studying every form of warfare from ancient sword fighting to modern space combat, and they had developed tactics that incorporated lessons learned from 10,000 years of killing each other. The aliens were facing the accumulated wisdom of a species that had turned war into an art form. Lieutenant Martinez aboard the Defiance showed why human weapons technology was decades ahead of anything the aliens possessed. Each projectile fired by his ship carried artificial intelligence that learned from the battlefield and adapted its attack pattern to overcome whatever defenses it encountered. The smart munitions coordinated with each other to overwhelm enemy shields and armor with devastating efficiency. The psychological impact on both alien fleets was as destructive as the physical damage being inflicted by human weapons. The Zephyrians had built their entire culture around the concept of martial superiority, but they were being systematically destroyed by opponents they had considered weak. The Crystallines prided themselves on logical thinking and mathematical precision, but human chaos tactics made their careful calculations useless. As the fourth part of the battle reached its climax, both alien commanders realized that they had made the worst mistake in their species' history by underestimating humanity. The three human ships had already destroyed or disabled over 60 alien vessels, while taking only minor damage to their own hulls. The hunters had become the hunted, and the galaxy was about to learn that humanity's greatest deception had been pretending to be harmless when they were actually the most dangerous predators among the stars. The second day of negotiations began with War Speaker Klaxon announcing that his patience was running thin and that the Zephyrian Empire would not waste much more time listening to human peace proposals. He stood at the head of the conference table with his arms crossed over his massive chest, and his yellow eyes glared at everyone in the room, like a predator, deciding which prey to kill first. Ambassador Parker maintained her calm, professional manner, even though she could see that the talks were falling apart before they had really begun. She had dealt with aggressive alien species before, but never two at the same time, while they were actively preparing for war against each other. Her aide, Karen Walsh, whispered updates about the military situation outside the station, and each report made it clear that both fleets were getting ready for battle. Dr. Pete Hansen was a specialist in alien psychology who had spent 30 years studying how different species thought and made decisions. He sat quietly in the corner of the conference room, taking notes on everything he observed, and his expression grew more worried as the hours passed. Hansen had seen this pattern before, and he knew that both the Zephyrians and crystallines were locked into cultural behaviors that made backing down almost impossible. Resonance Prime Vexhi had shifted from blue crystal to a deep purple color that the translators said meant deep philosophical disagreement with everything being discussed. The other crystalline representatives formed geometric patterns that pulsed with harsh light, and their harmonic communications filled the room with sounds like breaking glass. They were making it clear that they considered the peace talks to be a waste of their valuable time. Captain Morrison walked the corridors of Nexus Prime during a break in the negotiations, and he could feel the tension building like electricity in the air before a thunderstorm. The station was filled with diplomats and observers from dozens of different species, and all of them were talking quietly about what would happen when the talks failed. Everyone seemed to know that war was coming, and the only question was how bad it would be. Commander Roy Adams reviewed security reports from his team and found disturbing patterns in the alien fleet movements. Both the Zephyrians and crystallines were positioning their ships not just for war against each other, but in formations that would allow them to control all the space routes leading away from Nexus Prime. It looked like they were planning to trap anyone who might try to leave the station before the fighting started. The afternoon session of talks went even worse than the morning. Ambassador Parker presented a detailed proposal that would give both sides access to different parts of the disputed territory while setting up neutral zones where neither could build military bases. She had worked on the plan for weeks, and it addressed most of the concerns that both alien delegations had raised in earlier meetings. War Speaker Claxon listened to the translation of Parker's proposal and then threw back his head and laughed with a sound like rocks falling down a mountain. He told the room that humans clearly did not understand how real warriors settled their differences, and that the Zephyrian Empire would take everything it wanted by force rather than accept scraps from weak negotiators who had never conquered anything. The insult hit home because Claxon was technically correct. Humanity had never built an empire by conquering other species, and most aliens saw this as proof that humans were naturally weak and passive. The human delegates kept their faces neutral, but Adams noticed that several of his security people had their hands closer to their weapons than usual. Resonance Prime Vexhi responded by shifting to a sharp red color and broadcasting harmonic frequencies that hurt human ears. The translator worked overtime to convert the complex crystal language, but the meaning was clear. The crystalline collective believed that humans lacked the spiritual purity to understand the deep, philosophical issues at stake in this conflict, and that their simple minds could not grasp concepts that were beyond their primitive culture. Dr. Hansen watched the alien reactions and realized that something fundamental had changed in their behavior. Both delegations had started the talks with at least some pretense of considering human proposals, but now they were openly dismissive and contemptuous. It was as if they had decided that the humans were not worth even pretending to respect anymore. Captain, Helen Brooks received an urgent message from her intelligence officer aboard the UES Sentinel, and the news was alarming. Long-range sensors had detected additional alien ships jumping into the outer system and taking positions that would cut off any escape routes from Nexus Prime. Both the Zephyrian and crystalline fleets were being reinforced by heavy battle units that carried enough firepower to destroy entire space stations. The evening brought a private meeting between Ambassador Parker and the human delegation where they tried to figure out what had gone wrong with the negotiations. Karen Walsh had been monitoring alien communications, and she reported that both sides were now referring to the humans as obstacles that needed to be removed before the real war could begin. Captain Morrison joined the meeting by secure video link from the Harmony, and his face was grim as he shared intelligence reports from Earth Command. Admiral Claire Thompson had sent word that both alien empires had been making diplomatic contacts with other species and spreading the message that humanity had become too involved in galactic politics for their own good. The situation became critical when a Zephyrian patrol ship fired on a human shuttle that was returning from a failed attempt to meet with moderate voices in the alien delegations. The shuttle pilot, Commander Alex Turner, managed to avoid the worst of the attack, but 3 human diplomats were killed and 7 others were badly injured. Cultural attaché Nancy Lewis was among the wounded, and she had been one of Parker's most experienced negotiators. War Speaker Claxon claimed that the attack was an accident caused by a targeting computer malfunction, but he refused to apologize or offer any compensation for the human casualties. He said that space around Nexus Prime was becoming dangerous and that the human delegation should leave immediately for their own safety. His tone made it clear that this was more of a threat than a warning. Ambassador Parker requested an emergency session of the Galactic Council to address the attack on human personnel, but she learned that both the Zephyrian Empire and Crystalline Collective had enough political influence to delay any official response for weeks or even months. The other council members seemed reluctant to get involved in what they saw as a minor incident between 3 relatively small powers. The final blow came when Dr. Hansen completed his analysis of alien behavior patterns and delivered his conclusions to the human delegation. Both the Zephyrians and Crystallines had been using the peace talks as cover to study human diplomatic methods and military capabilities while positioning their fleets for a coordinated attack. The negotiations had been doomed from the start because neither side had ever intended to make peace. Captain Morrison received new orders from Earth Command as the 3rd day of talks came to an end. The diplomatic mission was officially terminated, and all human personnel were ordered to evacuate Nexus Prime immediately. Admiral Thompson's message was brief and direct, but Morrison could hear the anger in her voice as she authorized the withdrawal. The evacuation began at dawn on the 4th day, but long-range sensors detected both alien fleets moving to intercept the human ships as they tried to leave the system. The trap that Commander Adams had suspected was finally springing shut, and the 3 human vessels found themselves facing over 200 alien warships that had been waiting for exactly this moment. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Harmony and watched the massive space station grow larger on the main screen. Nexus Prime was the most important neutral meeting place in the galaxy, and today it would host talks that could save or destroy 3 star systems. The station spun slowly in the void like a great metal wheel with lights blinking along its outer ring, where ships from dozens of different worlds came to dock. Ambassador Lisa Parker walked up beside him and smoothed down her dark blue diplomatic uniform. She had spent 20 years learning to speak with alien races, and her calm voice never showed fear, even when dealing with the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Morrison had seen her work before and knew she was one of the best humans had to offer when it came to making peace between warring aliens. The communications officer turned from his station with a tired look on his young face. Lieutenant Dan. Wilson had been monitoring alien chatter for the past 3 days, and the news was not good. Both the Zephyrian Empire and the Crystalline Collective had been building up their fleets near the disputed border worlds, and neither side seemed interested in backing down from what looked like it would become a bloody war. Commander Roy Adams stepped onto the bridge carrying a datapad filled with security reports. As head of security for the diplomatic mission, he had to worry about keeping everyone safe while they tried to make peace between 2 alien races that were known for their violent tempers. Adams was a big man with gray hair and scars on his hands from his days as a Marine before he joined the diplomatic corps. He had seen enough fighting to know when a situation was about to go bad. The Zephyrians were reptilian creatures that stood nearly 8 feet tall and had thick green scales covering their muscular bodies. They lived for war and conquest, and their empire had grown by crushing dozens of smaller civilizations under their military might. Their ships looked like giant metal predators with weapons bristling from every surface, and their commanders spoke only in terms of victory or death. with no middle ground between the two. The crystalline collective was completely different but just as dangerous in their own way. They were beings made of living crystal that could change their shape and color based on their emotions and thoughts. When they were calm, they appeared as beautiful geometric forms that sparkled like diamonds, but when angry they became dark jagged, shapes that could cut through metal with their razor-sharp edges. Their ships were grown rather than built, and looked like massive crystal formations that could fire beams of pure energy. Ambassador Parker reviewed her notes one more time as they approached the docking bay. She had studied both alien cultures for months and prepared detailed proposals that she hoped would give each side something they wanted, while avoiding the war that would kill millions of innocent beings on the colony worlds caught between the two empires. The Harmony docked with a soft thud and the airlock hissed as it sealed. Captain Morrison watched his crew prepare for what could be the most important diplomatic mission in human history. Humans had been part of the Galactic Council for almost 200 years, but they were still seen as newcomers by the older alien civilizations. Most aliens thought of humans as useful mediators because they were not powerful enough to threaten anyone, but not primitive enough to be completely ignored. Lieutenant Ben Collins was running final checks on the security scanners when the first alien delegation came aboard. War Speaker Klaxon of the Zephyrian Empire filled the corridor with his massive frame, and his yellow eyes glowed with barely controlled aggression. Behind him came 6 other Zephyrian warriors, wearing their traditional battle armor, even though this was supposed to be a peaceful meeting. Ambassador Parker greeted them with the proper ceremonial words in their own language, but War Speaker Klaxon just snorted and replied in heavily accented English that he was here to discuss terms of surrender, not to waste time with human peacemaking. His voice was deep and rough like grinding stones, and when he spoke his sharp teeth showed in what might have been a smile or a threat. The crystalline delegation arrived an hour later, led by Resonance Prime Vexhi, who appeared as a tall pillar of blue crystal that hummed with musical tones. The crystallines communicated through harmonic vibrations that had to be translated by special computers, and Vexhi's first message was that the humans should not interfere in matters beyond their understanding. Captain Helen Brooks commanded the escort ship UES Sentinel, and she watched the proceedings from her own bridge through the communication links. Her tactical officer, Lieutenant Collins, kept scanning both alien fleets that were positioned just outside the neutral zone, and the numbers were not encouraging. The Zephyrians had brought 47 warships, while the Crystallines had 63 of their grown vessels, and all of them carried enough firepower to level entire planets. The first negotiation session took place in the main conference room of Nexus Prime, where representatives from both sides sat across a polished metal table, while Ambassador Parker tried to find common ground. She spoke carefully about the benefits of peace and the terrible cost of war, but both alien delegations seemed more interested in showing their strength than in finding solutions. War Speaker Klaxon slammed his clawed fist on the table when Parker suggested that both sides could share mining rights to the disputed asteroids. He declared that the Zephyrian Empire took what it wanted by force and did not need human permission to claim what was rightfully theirs. The other Zephyrian warriors growled their agreement, and their hands moved closer to the ceremonial weapons. They wore even during peaceful meetings. Resonance Prime Vexhi responded by changing color from blue to angry red, and the harmonic translator filled the room with harsh, discordant sounds. The message was clear that the crystalline collective would never share their sacred crystal gardens with the barbaric reptiles, and that any attempt to take them would be met with total war. Ambassador Parker tried again with different proposals, but each suggestion was met with contempt from both sides. The Zephyrians saw compromise as weakness, and the Crystallines believed their cause was too pure to be sullied by deals with their enemies. Hours passed, and the talks went nowhere while the military buildup continued outside the station. Captain Morrison received regular updates from his intelligence officers, and the news kept getting worse. Both alien fleets were moving closer to the neutral zone, and their weapons were being charged for battle. It looked like the peace talks were just a cover while both sides prepared for the war they had always intended to fight. The alien fleets were in complete disarray, as both the Zephyrian Empire and Crystalline Collective watched their military superiority crumble under the relentless human assault. War Speaker Klaxon had lost over half his battle group, and his surviving ships were scattered across the system as their captains tried to regroup, while avoiding the deadly accurate fire from the 3 human vessels that seemed to be everywhere at once. Captain Jake Morrison opened a communication channel to both enemy fleets, and his voice carried the cold authority of a species that had just revealed its true nature. He informed both alien commanders that humanity had tried to solve this conflict through peaceful negotiation, but that their contempt for human efforts and their threats against human personnel had forced a different kind of response. Morrison made it clear that the lesson in human capabilities was just beginning. Resonance Prime Vexhi's crystalline form had turned black with shock and fear as the collective tried to understand how they had so completely misjudged the species they had dismissed as harmless mediators. The mathematical models that governed crystalline thinking were being rewritten in real time as data from the battle showed that human weapons technology was generations ahead of anything in their databases. Captain Helen Brooks coordinated the pursuit phase of the battle as the remaining alien ships tried to retreat to defensive positions. She explained to her crew that humanity had learned long ago that allowing a defeated enemy to escape and regroup was a mistake that could cost lives later. The human ships moved to prevent either alien fleet from linking up or establishing any kind of organized defense. Lieutenant Ben Collins demonstrated why human tactical thinking was superior to alien military doctrine, as he used gravitational fields and asteroid debris as weapons against ships that were trying to hide behind natural cover. The rigid thinking of both alien species made them predictable, while human adaptability allowed them to turn any environment into a battlefield advantage. Dr. Pete Hansen watched the systematic destruction of 2 galactic powers and realized that he was witnessing the end of an era. For 2 centuries, humanity had been content to play the role of peaceful mediators while secretly developing military technology that surpassed anything possessed by the older alien civilizations. The galaxy was about to learn that human restraint had been a choice rather than a limitation. Ambassador Lisa Parker found herself in the strange position of conducting diplomacy through military action as she broadcast messages to the surviving alien ships explaining why humanity had been forced to reveal their true capabilities. She told both fleets that they had chosen to see human desires for peace as weakness, and that their mistake was about to reshape the balance of power throughout known space. War Speaker Klaxon made a desperate attempt to rally his remaining forces by appealing to Zephyrian pride and their tradition of never surrendering to any enemy, but his warriors were facing opponents who fought with a combination of advanced technology and tactical brilliance that made resistance seem pointless. The reptilian commander watched in horror as his most experienced battle groups were torn apart by human weapons that seemed to anticipate every move his ships made. Captain Tony Richards brought the Defiance alongside a cluster of damaged crystalline vessels and demonstrated the mercy that humans could show to defeated enemies. Instead of destroying the helpless ships, he offered their crews the chance to surrender and receive medical assistance for their wounded. The gesture was calculated to show both alien species that humans could choose restraint even when they held overwhelming advantage. The psychological warfare aspect of the battle was as important as the physical destruction being inflicted on both alien fleets. Commander Roy Adams explained to Ambassador Parker that humanity was sending a message that would spread throughout the galaxy about what happened to species that threatened human survival. The lesson needed to be clear enough that no other alien civilization would make the same mistake in the future. Lieutenant Paul Martinez coordinated the final phase of the engagement, as both alien fleets attempted to signal their surrender through traditional galactic protocols. But Captain Morrison had already decided that conventional surrender was not sufficient punishment for species that had planned the genocide of human diplomatic personnel. The aliens needed to understand that some actions carried consequences that could not be negotiated away. The Zephyrian Empire broadcast offers of territorial concessions and tribute payments in exchange for the survival of their remaining ships. But Morrison rejected every proposal with the explanation that the time for negotiation had passed, when they chose to threaten human lives. War Speaker Klaxon found himself in the impossible position of facing an enemy that was more ruthless than his own warrior culture. Resonance. Prime Vexhi attempted to appeal to human logic by offering to share crystalline technology and scientific knowledge in exchange for mercy. But the human response was that such offers should have been made during the peace negotiations. The collective learned too late that humans valued trust and good faith more than technological advantages. The final 17 minutes of the battle became a textbook example of how a technologically superior force could systematically destroy a numerically larger enemy through superior tactics and coordination. The three human ships worked together like fingers of the same hand as they eliminated the remaining alien resistance with mechanical precision. Chief Engineer Maria Santos reported that all human vessels were operating at peak efficiency with minimal battle damage, while their ammunition supplies remained more than adequate to complete their mission. The aliens had expected to capture 3 lightly armed diplomatic ships, but instead, they had encountered the advance guard of a military power that had been hiding its strength for 2 centuries. As the last alien weapons fell silent, Captain Morrison recorded his final battle log with words that would be remembered throughout galactic history. He stated that humanity had offered the hand of friendship to both alien species and had that offer rejected with contempt and threats of violence. The galaxy wanted to see what humans would do when their peaceful nature was mistaken for weakness, and the answer was floating in debris fields around them. The 3 human ships formed up in formation and began the long journey back to Earth, while behind them, the survivors of 2 great alien empires limped home in damaged vessels to report that they had encountered a species that was far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The age of humanity as mediators was over, and the age of human dominance was about to begin. Captain Morrison sent a final message to both alien homeworlds with a warning that would change galactic politics forever. He told them that humanity had spent 200 years building relationships with dozens of species throughout known space, and that any attempt at revenge would result in consequences that would make this battle look like a minor skirmish. The galaxy now knew that when words failed, humans were prepared to let their weapons speak, and the conversation would be conducted in a language that everyone would understand.